All right, call to order the May 10th, 2017 meeting of the Sacramento Regional County Sanitation District and the Sacramento Area Sewer District. Would the clerk please call the roll and establish quorum?
Yes, good morning. Directors Ashby, Bruins.
Present.
Frost.
Present.
Guerra.
Present.
Harris.
Here.
Hume. Kennedy.
Here.
Lee.
Here.
Morin.
Here.
Natoli.
Here.
Orozco. Peters. Cerna.
Here.
McGarvey.
Here.
Villegas. Warren. Carr. And you have a quorum.
Thank you.
This meeting of the Sacramento Regional County Sanitation and Sacramento Area Sewer Districts is being broadcast live on Metro Cable 14, the local government affairs channel, on the Comcast, Consolidated Communications, and AT&T UVerse cable systems. The meeting is closed captioned for our hearing impaired viewers and webcast at www.sacmetrocable.tv. Today's meeting will replay Sunday, May 14th at 6 p.m. on Channel 14. In accordance with Government Code 54952.3, compensation for a meeting of these legislative bodies is required to be verbally disclosed. The amount of $100 will be paid for each member participating today as a member of the Sacramento Regional County Sanitation District, and the amount of $100 will be paid for each board member participating today as a member of Sacramento Area Sewer District. Compensation for Sacramento County supervisors and City of Sacramento council members is paid to the county and city respectively to partially offset the cost of those governments. Compensation for other board members is delivered to the individuals. Members of the audience wishing to address the board should fill out a speaker identification form located at the back of chambers and hand it to the clerk. Please speak into the microphone when addressing the board and state your name for the record. Please silence your electronic devices at this time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody, and for some of us, good afternoon. Would you join me in the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We are going to move closed session toward the end of the meeting, and so therefore we are on Section 1, Timed Matters.
Yes. Acting as Sacramento County Sanitation District's Financing Authority and Sacramento Regional County Sanitation District, your district separate matter. Item 1, approve the Sacramento Regional County Sanitation District and the Sacramento County Sanitation District's Financing Authority fiscal year 2017-18 final budgets.
Good morning, Chair, members of the board. At the last board meeting, your board had a budget workshop, and there were no comments from your board to make any changes to it. So we're just bringing back so that you can take the final action. If you do not have any questions, I ask for your vote for the item.
Okay, any questions?
Move the budget.
Second.
Okay, it's moved by Director Harris, second by Director Bruins. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstain?
Great. Acting as Sacramento Regional County Sanitation District, your district consent matters are items 2 through 4.
And I have no cards from the audience, speaker cards for the audience to discuss an item on consent. Is there any member of the board that would like to discuss or pull an item? Is there a motion?
Move the consent calendar.
Second.
Okay, moved by Director Guerra, second by Director Harris. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstain? Thank you. Public comment. Again, I don't have any cards, so if there's a member of the public that would like to speak, please fill out a card, come forward. Oh, thank you. Madam Clerk.
Okay. Acting as Sacramento County Sanitation District's Financing Authority and Sacramento Area Sewer District, your district separate matters is item number 6, approve the Sacramento Area Sewer District and the Sacramento County Sanitation District's Financing Authority fiscal year 2017-18 final budgets.
Like with the regional SAN, and also we had the budget hearing at the last board meeting, and there were no questions for changes. So this is for your vote to approve the budget. And also, you're voting on both the financing authority, so all members need to vote on the financing authority, but only SASD members need to vote for the SASD budget.
So therefore, two motions?
Yeah.
Okay.
I move the financing authority.
Second.
Okay, Financing Authority moved by Director Natoli, second by Director Bruins. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstain?
And on behalf of SASD, I move the budget.
Second.
Okay, moved by Director Bruins, second by Director Frost for SASD. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Thank you.
Okay. Acting as Sacramento Regional County Sanitation District and Sacramento Area Sewer District, item number 7, Advisory Committee Recommendations, Construction Specifications Review.
This is a follow-up to a discussion that we had back in February. Last year when we were going through and awarding Echo Water-related projects, there were a number of protests, and your board asked for a subcommittee to be formed to look at the specifications to see if there are changes that need to be made. And a subcommittee was formed, and we also hired an outside counsel, Myers-Nawe, to help us with the review and make recommendations. Your board received a presentation and also suggestions for 5 changes. And when you heard those recommendations, you asked follow-up information for 2 of those 5 recommendations, specifically related to a cone of silence and also the language related to the collusion. So for today's discussion is to focus on those 2 items and hear your feedback, and ultimately what we're looking for is a direction to go ahead and make the changes so that we can make those changes to the specifications, and we'll bring back that when we make those changes to you for the final approval. So I'll start off, and I'll have Lisa join me in the discussion. In terms of item number 3 is related to the non-collusion language. What we had was a language that was used to protest specifically related to the BNR project. And we did research in terms of whether the language that we had in our specs is consistent with the other public agencies, and how do we differ, and what the effects are. What our research found is 10 of the 17 agencies that we looked at, the public agencies in California, they had a language which was very straightforward and all relied on an affidavit of non-collusion statement at the time of the bid. And ours had a little bit more information, which was the basis for the protest and all the things that you may be aware of. So our recommendation continues to be is to rely on the simple non-collusion affidavit for the most projects. But where there's a large project that we would look at the large consortiums that may be bidding, that when we do the pre-qualification, we would ask these potential bidders, because as we do the pre-qualification, we reach out to the potential bidders, we would ask them to disclose relationships that they may have with other potential bidders at the pre-qualification stage. So it gives the opportunity for the potential bidders to consider that information, and if they want to protest it, but all those things are resolved at that level, not at the bid time. Once those things are resolved at the pre-qualification level, simply the non-collusion affidavit submission suffices the fact that there's no collusion. That happens at the bid time. So that's the proposal that we're making, and we'd be happy to take any questions or your thoughts on that.
Thank you. Director Natoli.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. So let's just take it back just for a moment then to the situation we were presented with, where we'd sought information in the pre-qualification. We had the letter, and using the example of the protest we had before us, and we still had all this discussion. And I got to tell you, I still, recalling back on that, wasn't entirely comfortable with what we where we ended up with that discussion is related to an announcement by a foreign corporation, said they got the bid award from this district, and that may have been their pronouncement, their take on it. And we had all the discussion where you could go look at this tree that related to the corporate holdings and to the interface there. And they affirmatively said, our council reviewed it, that there was no collusion, but that they even tried to distance themselves to some degree as to corporate level of decision making and so forth. And you had all this bleed over of corporate boards and of officers that had roles in these companies, and that may be the world that we live in. But again, I'm not clear, I guess, yet. Maybe that's my question to Prabhakar and to Lisa. So how does this differ from what we did before? Because we may have asked a question distinctly, but it came up early enough, and then we ended up with this barrage of information, which I think certainly put it squarely in the laps of this board, properly so. But we were then trying to sort it out, and I'm not so sure that what we're instituting here is going to present itself any differently in the event we have a similar situation in the future. So it just means you disclose early, but it was disclosed early enough on, and then we had all this barrage of information that came after after folks had submitted bids and so forth. And so how does this change that? I guess that's my question, Prabhakar and Lisa, from what we had. How does it change from what happened last time?
Yeah, so just a little bit of a perspective. Regional SAN, since its inception, we probably did maybe $2 to $3 billion worth of project. We only had one, to my recollection, of this type of complaint, which things weren't clear. And to my knowledge, this language has existed for at least 20 years, if not longer. So the proposal that you have in front of it essentially eliminates that type of thing for most projects, because most projects won't require pre-qualification. So those projects will only have a affidavit of non-collusion. Once you submit that, and you're good. And that is what you have in 7 of the 8 jurisdictions of the member agencies that serve on this board, including the County of Sacramento. That's the language that currently exists. At some point, County of Sacramento had similar language with Regional SAN, because Regional SAN and County of Sacramento work together very closely in thing, but the county made the change, presumably to move away from this ambiguity that caused our thing. So bulk of the projects, you wouldn't have an issue. Where there's a large project, I think the way that we're going to frame it is that if there are any protests that happen, first of all, it's incumbent upon the party that's protesting to prove that there's a collusion or going to be a collusion. I think what we're basing is that we don't mind receiving bids from sister companies with the relationships, because that actually, in a way, it improves the competition. That's how the federal government does. That's how most of the agencies do. What we don't want is the actual collusion. Is what we're trying to prevent happening. So at that stage, it would be incumbent upon whoever is protesting to show that it is going to be a collusion between these two. And barring those, having them showing those things, and that it would not stand at that point. It would move on to. So that's how we are envisioning things.
So the burden of proof then is on the protestant. And yet when we have evidence that this board and information presented to us, and we're trying to decipher who's in charge, who could make the call. You can tell us well and fine, but we're a separate division of such and such company. But oddly enough, you got an executive officer, you got a financial officer, you got members of the board. I mean, the familiarity, and maybe that's again just the way the corporate world is, and it may not be collusive in any true sense of the word, but it's certainly, again, and I'll speak for myself. I mean, there was a great degree of uncomfortableness about all that, and then when we're trying to go down through it and do it certainly in a very public setting, and again, when folks are making pronouncements about they got the bid, but no, there's no collusion because they're a separate division of us, and I don't know. Again, maybe we just have to take it on when it comes to us, but I don't know that this provides much more information relative to any board decision, and maybe we'll never have to cross this threshold again because projects of this size won't arise in the next generation. But yeah, Lisa?
We may face it again because we have a $300 million project coming up.
Okay, and so in light of that,
to address your concerns, the thing that the public bidding laws are trying to prevent is collusion.
Yeah.
Bid suppression, bid manipulation, and those types of things. It's not trying to address all corporate relationships because it can't. That's not the purpose of public bidding. The purpose of public bidding, as I all know, and we've said this in the hearing on BNR, is to make sure that everything's fair, competitive, and there is no favoritism. simply having a corporate structure where there's an overall arching company doesn't mean that you're going to have any bid manipulation, favoritism, or anything like that. And we've already gone through that. And I understand that you still aren't comfortable with that, but your concerns aren't what the concerns of the public bidding laws are trying to address.
Does that require firewalls, though, of some sort? Again, ones that, ones that we wouldn't know about necessarily. So,
well, those companies, as you recall, illustrated the firewalls and illustrated their actual corporate governing structure versus what was perceived by a disappointed bidder. And also, just from a statewide perspective, Caltrans, I just got a call from them probably a couple weeks ago. They were, or maybe a month or two ago now, they were facing the same issue. They came down on the same side as our office did, and as the ORIC memorandum, which went into extreme detail and analysis. You have to keep in mind that these are huge contracts, and disappointed bidders are going to be doing whatever they can to try and get the contract and disrupt the process. So our goal and our, I guess, duty as the public entity is to ensure that the public bidding laws are met and that all of the other noise is kind of is put aside. So I think by requiring what Prabhakar and my memo suggest is requiring actual collusion and evidence of collusion. They can still have a process if they would like to. The process is now going to happen earlier. The process will happen in the pre-qualification setting versus at bid time, so that we're not under, we're still going to be under time pressures, obviously, because of the size of this project in particular, but we have time to, and a procedure to address this earlier rather than when we're under the gun at bidding time. And you did mention, can I just say one more thing? You mentioned that, I think, something to the effect of this was brought to our attention early on the last project, and that simply wasn't true. It was brought to our attention after bidding, even though the disappointed bidder knew who was pre-qualified on this project and also what the corporate relationship was.
Let me clarify that, because what I was referring to is that a letter that one of the bidders had submitted is saying that there was no relationship, whatever that was, back in that November time frame, and then it came January, February, and we had other information, and so they had certified to certain things, which may have been true, but didn't reveal what we then learned later that may have not, reflected on this board's decision. Is that not accurate? I
think that everything in that November letter was accurate, and they were being proactive. The bidder was being proactive, and they ended up not being the low bidder, so that wasn't relevant. But the disappointed bidder that filed their bid protest certainly knew about all of this prior to the bidding time.
But then they disclosed it to us, because that in that November letter they didn't disclose all those relationships for the companies. Maybe they didn't have to, but it certainly.
Yeah, I think they did.
Oh, you think they did?
Yes.
So we had all those flow charts and all those corporate holdings and all that?
They did.
Okay.
Yep.
I guess I didn't. My recollection wasn't that came out later.
No. They disclosed that in their. It was Flatiron, and they disclosed the corporate relationship, and the whole parent companies and all of that in the November letter. And it didn't change our opinion because, as we went through the bid protest, and we all know the outcome. It didn't violate our specifications. That relationship didn't violate our specifications, in our opinion, and obviously in the majority of the board's opinion, because we ended up awarding based on that recommendation. Obviously we know there are some board members that had concerns, and that's obviously your prerogative to do that. But what our job is to try and minimize, I guess that's the goal. That was the goal of the specification review: minimize the bid protest. So this is a way of minimizing the protest at the time of award. And if a bidder, a potential bidder, I guess in this case, wants to bring it up, they need to be prepared to bring it up during an earlier process.
Okay. And then this last comment, and this relates to obviously what we're going to talk about next, but I think it does have a relationship to this proposed cone of silence and how information is either brought forward or not, and we can certainly talk about that in a moment. But that has some relevancy to the next item in my view. Thanks.
Thank you. Director Bruins.
Thank you. So just so I understand, if this process goes through in the pre-qualification stage, then is this precluding a bid protest at a later date?
On that basis. So at the bid stage, what we are proposing is really simply submitting the affidavit of non-collusion. That is what's going to happen. There is no discoveries, none of the things that happened when we had the BNR award. If there were to be anything, there would only be, yeah, it looks like my mic's on. It would happen at the pre-qualification level.
Okay, so then, so these bidders all know who they potentially are. They're all just pre-bid meeting, right?
Yes, they will. So as a pre-qualification is a pretty intensive process.
Right.
We will make some changes so that everybody knows. So once we hold the initial meetings and so who's interested, we can publish them. These are all the interested parties that are looking at bidding this project. At that point, they have the ability to make known any relationships and any protests.
Okay, so then it would be a formal process at that point.
That's correct.
With a deadline.
Yes.
And once that deadline passes, then do they sign off on the fact that there have been no bid protests, and then they move forward into the bidding process, so that when we award, we're not faced with a formal bid protest at that time?
Yeah, because the language would be changed in the specifications. We will simplify the language in the specifications where you wouldn't have any language that caused the bid protest to happen in the B&R situation. So they won't even have that ability because of the changes we're going to make to the specifications.
Okay, so they'll have a window of time in the pre-qualification period, and once that window of time is passed, then they don't have a further opportunity to bid, or to protest the bid.
That issue, yes.
On that issue.
Am I correct on that? Okay.
That's right.
Okay.
All right,
Thank you.
Any other questions? I'll just make the comment on that particular issue. I want to thank Lisa. I think that you laid it out perfectly. And as far as what we're actually trying to get at here, I think this is the best way we get, the closest we get to it. It's not a perfect, but there is no way of doing this perfectly. It's called the bidding process, which can be dirty. A little messy, I should say.
Yeah, don't say dirty.
Yeah, not dirty.
That
messy.
implies something.
Thank you. So I think that this, gets us to where we're trying to get. So I appreciate the work.
And the next issue is the cone of silence. Lisa did research. So Lisa, why don't you bring the alternatives that we have in front of us?
Sure. So there was some concern, I think, from a few board members regarding the inability or lack of ability to communicate with board members once the bidding process is started, and then once the award is announced or actually acted upon. So there are, and I think Myers-Nave referenced a few jurisdictions, although they didn't tell us which jurisdictions other than the federal government has this cone of silence, which prevents communications between bidders and anyone other than the designated person at the district, which would either be the district engineer or the project manager. So I did include in my memo to you a few jurisdictions that do implement cones of silences. Alameda County, the city of Oakland has some on a few of their projects I was able to find, and then the county of San Diego as well. There's 2 Florida counties, Miami-Dade and Broward, that Myers-Nave suggested we look at, and the language was actually identical, I think, to the Alameda County language. So basically there's 2 ways you can look at this. One is an absolute cone of silence, which would be once the notice of bids goes out until the time that the contract is awarded, the bidders can only communicate with or through one individual, either the district engineer or as a designee. Or you can have that cone of silence end once the formal recommendation to the board is made, which would be publishing the agenda. And then that would give, if the board so desires, an opportunity for bidders to then discuss it with others, mostly board members, I would assume, between the time of publication of the agenda, which is the formal recommendation, and then the board hearing. I think there's advantages to both. I prefer, obviously, the one that requires just communication only with one individual, because I think you can control the flow of information a lot easier, but I understand that some of the board members had concern about not being able to talk to constituents, potential bidders, that type of thing. So it's up to the board whether you would like to implement either or neither.
And I want to add one more item to that is, if you remember the B&R project and some other smaller projects, where you were getting a lot of information until the day of in terms of papers are coming in. If you remember, I had an AX or AE, I forgot the numbering system, that they were coming in fast and furious. So one change we're going to make is the contractors have to submit everything that they need to submit in writing a week before the board meeting. It's a dead cutoff, so that you have everything for you to consider, and staff has everything for them to consider and make the recommendation, not based on the changing things that happen, after the recommendations are made. They still can bring up new things at the board meeting. That's fine. It's just we're saying that have some time, the dead time, where we can all, silent time, where we can all look at it and formulate our opinions and whatnot. So that's a change that we are proposing to make. That we'll make that as part of the specs.
Thank you. Director Hume.
Yeah, I just wanted to echo the chair's comments. I think that though this was largely a cerebral exercise in exploring maybe the inelegance of the language as it existed, I'm happy with the final result, and I'd be happy to make the motion to approve these changes.
Director Natoli.
Well, I expressed concerns about an absolute cone of silence, and I think I don't find very compelling that 2 counties in California and 1 school district and 1 city have instituted this when you think about all the public agencies. And again, if we want to have a period of time, but I do think once the recommendation is made public, that folks should have an opportunity. I don't care if they're bidders, if they're constituents, if they're ratepayers, should have the opportunity. Because absolute cone of silence, and if you do this under the fact that they would then be disqualified, and again, ignorance is no excuse, but that could, again, I think put folks certainly on this board and or those that are submitting bids and or related parties, and whether they be attorneys, whether they be employees, members of labor organizations, whoever it might be, and I don't find that as being good governance, I guess. And I'm not suggesting that people need to be lobbied 24/7. On the other hand, I think we have a role and responsibility, both fiduciary and certainly a responsibility to the ratepayers of this district. Part of that is information, and sometimes all of the information is not known 1 week prior or at the close of bid submittals. And so I would submit that, at least in my view, maybe a modified approach that certainly allows, within a reasonable time frame, a few days of exchange of information, if that's what people choose to do on projects that have multi-million, if not billion-dollar aspects to them. And so I would not be supportive of a motion that would have an absolute cone of silence. I think that, again, I don't find it compelling that 2 counties in Florida and 2 in California, and that should be the rule that this district ought to adopt. Thanks.
Director Frost.
On the absolute cone of silence, where, say I had a question, do I go to the staff and then they extend the question and then the staff comes back and communicates to the entire board my question and the answer in writing? Is that the process on this cone of
Again,
silence?
it depends on the question. If it's deserving of every board member to be hearing the same question, we'll find a way to get that information out. So I'm assuming by your question, presumably that's a question to the contractor.
It's a question. Well, my concern is that if all the information is processed through one person, each one of us receives and sends information and interprets it in a different way. And so we may not, that one person who's communicating the information to the board may not communicate it in the way that the person who was giving the information communicated it. So it does kind of limit our information and their ability to communicate with us. And so, and I guess I just had a question relating to your process. Like at the county, if I ask a question, to the county executive, he lets the entire board know that this question was submitted and this is the response to the question. So everyone has all the information.
Our number one job is to keep you all appraised. So if you ask a question that requires a clarification, every board member will receive that clarification once we formulated that clarification. Now, if we have to go to ask the contractor to get that clarification, we'll do that, so that you're not communicating. But with Director Natoli's suggestion, that if there's a period where the cone of silence is lifted, then you certainly have direct contact that can be made. So that's an option.
So I would just support Director Natoli's modified cone of silence.
I don't know, did you have a modified cone of silence? I thought you were against it.
Why don't we do this just for procedurally? Why don't we take the 2 items separately as far as motions, and we'll do that after the discussion.
Okay.
Okay.
But there was a question, Don, sorry.
Oh, yeah, well, no, yeah, and I think Director Hume put a motion on it, and if it got a second, I hadn't offered, I certainly prepared, I was going to allow some further dialogue, again, you know, and if it's just a straight vote, but if there's other train of thought, I certainly would offer that as a motion, but I hadn't yet, so through the chair, I had not done that yet, but I spoke to the motion that was offered by Director Hume, so.
Thank you for the clarification. Director Guetta.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I was actually going to recommend that maybe we split the question, divide the question. I do believe, I think we're moving forward in the right place on the collusion restrictions and making sure that we can kind of get that off the table early on and help us move through the business. Although I strongly agree with Director Natoli's concerns about making sure that all of us are elected to be representatives and have access to our community, and sometimes not just the contractors, but in some of these projects, Echo Water Project is a good example of that, large implications to a community and how that may impact anybody who wants to come in and talk to them, whether it be neighbors or whatnot. So I think the cone of silence piece needs to we need further discussion on how to address that so we're not impeding the right for the public to access. I mean, I don't know if I was in the grocery store, as many of us do, and somebody said, hey, I want to talk to you about this issue, and I just told them, well, I can't talk to you about that issue. I don't know how well that would go with any constituent. So I think, to me, that's a large concern. So if anything, I'd like to just actually let's figure out that piece and work more on that component, and move forward on passing the collusion restrictions today.
Director Hume.
Yes, thank you. First of all, I'd be happy to amend my motion to either limit it to the first question and/or to include a modified cone of silence. But I'd like some clarification, because in my reading of the language of recommendation number 4, it says that at no time prior shall any bidder contact. It doesn't say anything about a constituent or a ratepayer or even another interested association. Is that correct?
Correct. Yeah.
And so I would put the question out there, and again, I'm happy to bifurcate the issues, but I would put the question out there that given that limited restriction as to who may contact the board, are your concerns still?
Just real quickly, but again, it could be somebody associated with the bidder. So, how do you split
Well, a bidder
that?
or their representative. I mean, like, you can't have the attorney in that situation.
So what
you
about-
could have but you could have I mean, theoretically, I guess you could have a labor union just interested in the project, not supporting a bidder or
But what
the
if I'm
other.
an employee of that company and I work for XYZ firm that's in a part of that bid,
Yeah.
and I may not have corporate blessing, but I'm catching Eric in the store. I'm saying, hey, that's coming up to the district. You really ought to support that because it's good for jobs. It's good for this. Again, you can get into a situation where I think that, again, I don't want to get, too theoretical, but that's the potential, and that's what all of us, we're accessible to folks, and so I would just not like, because I can see that question, well, so-and-so saw you talking to so-and-so in the store there, everybody's got a picture phone on there, and guess what, Supervisor Natoli was talking to Mr. Guerra about that project, I know it, here I heard him talking about it, so I just think that we can avoid that and still have open access, but also have that, I think, a funneling, so there's shared information, and I think that modified motion, we can get to that in a moment, but.
So, Mr. Chair, I would amend my motion to only address the collusion language and set aside recommendation 4 for further discussion.
Chair seconds.
Second.
Okay, so Mr. Hume, are you done? Okay. Director Harris.
Okay. There you go. Thank you. Thank you, Chair. So things just changed from the time I punched up, as happens on occasion. I actually am in favor of a modified cone of silence, but I'm happy to take these matters separately, so let's proceed with the vote.
Director Bruins?
Well, I have a basic question. Was this actually an item to be voted upon today?
It's not at this point, we didn't say
to
that.
provide direction. We
It's
can
a
do that in the
direction, but
form
if you
of a
want to do
motion.
it in the form of a
Okay, I
motion, you
just-
still can.
Right.
So we are, okay, because I didn't take that as a formal vote today. Okay. So having addressed that, I'd like to just get a clarification on the modification, or is that something we're just going to continue to work on from the discussion I've heard today?
Yeah, so modification is already proposed so
Right. It would be helpful to have a resolution today because we have the tertiary treatment facility bid coming up, and the specifications going out shortly.
Okay.
So if we could have a continued discussion on whether the board wants to adopt some form of cone of silence, that would be helpful, because I know that the project manager would like to include that in the bids specifications.
Let me just go on to one other thing that's a little more precise before we come back to that discussion. And that is, earlier you talked about having to have all material to us a week ahead of time. And, with Director Natoli's comments, there's nothing more difficult for us than to show up for a board meeting and have a stack of formal letters that we are supposed to have read, digested, and understood within 3 minutes before we start the board meeting. But I think if we modified that time period, I would like to see that anything like that be formally submitted and give us enough time to read it, but I think maybe 2 days prior. I don't think it has to be a week. If they have to give us a 48-hour period of time where all written material has to be submitted, that at least gives you time to scan it and email it to us, or forward emails, or however mode that you get it. I think that's a reasonable limitation. I think a week is a little aggressive. So having said that, then I'm very open to continuing the discussion about the rest of our modified recommendation.
Okay, before I call the question, I'm going to call on Angelique Ashby, who's not here.
Oh.
So who punched in as Angelique Ashby?
That was going to be depending upon whether or not my suggestion was favorable or not. So at the risk of maybe flipping it upside down, given the fact that we've talked a lot about kind of access to us as elected officials and kind of who can talk to who, what about the possibility of, rather than having a cone of silence, maybe a code of disclosure, right? Because I think we all recognize when, as elected officials, we move from a legislative to a quasi-judicial role, given the notion that we move into this appeal process, which changes our role, our responsibility, and our obligation to continue to be accessible, but to now recognize a quasi-judicial role. So rather than having the silence component, which is very complicated, complex, and I think each of us struggles with it a bit differently, a disclosure component, right? So you can talk to whoever you want about whatever, that doesn't change, but the fact that you, during this quasi-judicial hearing process, we disclose what was discussed so that there's full transparency, because I think we've all agreed that transparency is a good thing, that we talk about what we discussed in whatever format, so that there's full disclosure and there's no secrets about it, and it allows the process to continue to move forward, and we can individually determine to the extent that we want to discuss it with the public at the store, or folks who are lobbying on behalf of an applicant.
Okay, we can continue to comment on item number 2, but let's just clean some house here and call the question on the first motion that was made by, I believe, Director Hume, and seconded by the chair on the staff's recommendation of the collusion issue. Any other questions on that issues before we vote? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstain? Thank you. Cone of silence then. Any more comments or issues, questions on that, or suggested motions? One, I have a question, so nobody's punching in, and that's to focus on, because there's a couple of issues here. We just heard about disclosure, which is a little different than very different than a cone of silence. Cone of silence. What, in staff's mind, in this recommendation, what is the end that we're trying to reach here? What is the reason that we're asking for us to consider a cone of silence?
So I kind of go back to what I said before, which is the purpose of the public contracting laws. And a public contracting code, section 100, lays out to eliminate favoritism, to eliminate bias, to make sure that the process is fair. That's the main purpose, because not all parties have access to a high-powered attorney. I mean, in the case that we were talking about earlier, they did. We were, I guess, lucky enough that way, that all sides had attorneys. But it's,
And ours was better.
oh, thank you. But to limit, I mean, and so everything that happens in the public contracting aspect is supposed to be based on the lowest responsive bidder, not on who has access to the decision-making bodies. And you're supposed to be looking at the four corners of the bid in order to determine who to award the contract to. So the extraneous lobbying, I use that term loosely, and communication really gets in the way in a lot of times with the purpose of the public contracting requirements. So that is the reason, and I think some of the jurisdictions that have implemented it, and LA County, LA Unified School District has a really good example, lays out why it's doing this, and those are the reasons. It's to make sure that the process is transparent and fair, and that there's no undue influence based on who you know and who you have access to. And I'm obviously not implying that anybody on this board would ever engage in that kind of activity, because you, I think, are going to the opposite way. You've heard from everybody in the cases that we've had, but it just kind of eliminates the basis for that even to happen.
Okay, thank you. And I specifically asked the question because that is a completely different place you want to get as opposed to disclosure. I mean, that doesn't really address that.
Right, and that's my perspective, and I think as the attorney for this district that's letting these contracts, that is the way that I read the purpose, or I see the purpose, and I think that's what our outside counsel referenced when they did their memo as well. So it's not to limit access for just any reason. It's because to keep the process fair and keep the integrity of the process. I think that's why we're recommending it.
And I'll just give my perspective because nobody's punching in here. I said it at a hearing before, and as someone who used to be an extraneous lobbyist, it does put the firms that you're representing at a disadvantage when you're going up against the orgs of the world and the resources that they have. So I can see some validity to that argument. Okay, Director Natoli.
Yeah, just would offer, I think, some of the comments here that to Director Bruns' comment, maybe to have a requirement that all written material has to be done with, prior to 2 days before, whatever, that period of time, if it's publication of the agenda or whatever. I do think a week may be a little rigorous, and certainly 2 days puts a little more burden on the staff to then, receive and disseminate. And as I said a moment ago, certainly having a modified cone of silence, maybe in a period of time, but once that's on the public agenda, and I could even live with the disclosure piece of that as a part of that too. I mean, that's, it doesn't go to the chair's point to the same direction, but if you want to maintain the transparency, certainly the access for those who have wherewithal or those that don't have wherewithal, and even the casual conversation that could, if you have this, behind all of this, that if you break that cone of silence, that then you are subject to disqualification, and then we'll be debating those circumstances, that rather than to make it so rigorous from the time that bids are submitted right up until the time that this board convenes in session, I think that allowing for written information to be submitted, allowing for a period of time, it has to be 72 hours by virtue of publication of the agenda. It might even be a little more than that, because some of that's online now. So maybe it's it's 4 days or whatever, to allow for that exchange, and then if there's disclosure, I'm fine with that too. So you can even have another layer there, which I think puts a little more burden on board members, but that's okay. I mean, that's part of the process.
Yeah, and I think typically, just to address that point, the agenda is posted on Friday before the Wednesday meeting. Is that right?
Yeah. Okay.
So you would have, Friday and then the weekend in 2 days.
2 days, yeah.
Yeah, so suggestion is instead of 2 days, I would ask for a 3-day. Friday is when we distribute the agendas. Thursday night to some, but at least Friday everybody gets the agendas. So we can, whatever we get, we can submit either by paper or electronically on Friday, so you have the total package to look at. So instead of 7 days, we can make it 3 days. The suggestion is, a suggestion for an alternate recommendation is, we can try this cone of silence, modified cone of silence, so you have the ability to meet once the agenda is published for some time. If there are concerns, we can always back off and make it even tighter. It's just a suggestion for the board to consider. And I see that an absolute cone of silence, and I see there's a lot of reservation. So right now, none exists. So anything to help improving the process is better. So certainly I would say a modified cone of silence with bidders having a 3 days. The other thing that I want to mention is at the pre-qualification, we will educate the bidders. So these are all the spec conditions. Please remember, you cannot reach to anybody during this period, so they will have that knowledge at the time.
And there's nothing to prevent them, obviously, from still discussing it with staff or the point person plus their designee. So we'll still be getting that information that we can then share with the board either in advance or at the meeting, depending on if necessary.
Okay, so we're being asked to provide direction. It doesn't require a motion, but I think a motion would be cleaner so we can provide more specific direction. So is there a motion? Director Natoli?
Yep. I would offer a motion that we have a requirement for submittal of written information of 3 days prior to the publication of the agenda. That would be cut up.
Just by the time the agenda is published, which means a 3 days drop dead date.
Yeah, 3 days prior to the publication of the agenda, which I guess right now is a Friday in advance of the board meeting. And that we give direction regarding a modified cone of silence that would have it from the time, I guess, bid submittals are received until the time that the recommendation for the award is made in the public agenda. And then, so I don't know, that could be several weeks, it could be a month or two, I guess, right?
So I would make one clarification. I'm listening to your motion, at least you're trying to make.
Sure.
Is Wednesday is a board meeting. If we have everything by Friday at 10 o'clock, that gives us 3 days before the board meeting, and we can submit that information. So your motion should say 3 days before the board meeting. Is 3 business days before the board meeting is when all the information needs to be.
So then they need to have it ready, to have it to you before agenda is published.
Right.
Agenda, yeah, which is, again, coincides with the agenda.
All right, good, because I was actually coming back off of that in discussion. Okay, that would be motion for direction. And again, we can have discussion around, but I'm fine with disclosure even, during the time that the cone of silence comes off. But that may be an additional burden that we don't want to take on right now. So.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Director Hume. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstain? Thank you.
Okay, item number 8 is your miscellaneous director and district engineer matters.
They're just, we will not have the May 24th board meeting 2 weeks from today, but we will have the June 7th board meeting. June 7th is an odd board meeting. Usually we meet on the second Wednesdays and fourth Wednesdays of the month, but because the county chambers, I think, is going to be tied up for the county budget hearings in the second week of June, the board meeting was set on June 7th. So I just wanted to, I'll send an email out as a reminder to you and your staff as well. We do have some items that need to be acted upon on June 7th. So that's all I have.
Is that our only June meeting then, the 7th?
That is correct. We won't have the second June meeting because of the summer recess.
Okay.
Director Cerna?
Thank you. Is Rockers one of those items that we're hopefully going to be acting on, the direction on the Parkway cleanup? So the direction on the Parkway, not necessarily an action that we're planning on June 7th. So May 24th is the first meeting I'm having with the subcommittee to discuss the non-rate, non-fee revenue issues. Right.
And so we will report back in terms of what was discussed there and then what the directions are. But we won't be ready to actually have an action on June 7th. More likely July, August timeframe is what I would imagine the action be.
Okay, well, whatever we end up doing is not going to happen in a vacuum. And as you rightfully point out, we have the county is going to be considering its budget here shortly. And I assume we're going to have a pretty rich discussion next month about resource allocation for continued efforts to clean the Parkway, to patrol the Parkway. So it would be advantageous, at least speaking for the county, and I suspect the same might go for city of Sacramento, that we are armed with some direction and understanding of what resources might come from this agency that help advance those overall missions that the city and the county are pursuing.
Yeah, so the county made, I think I mentioned to you, is the county made a request to the district for asking for one position funded to help with this. And I will certainly be bringing forth on May 24th with the subcommittee. And then based on the direction, if it's something that the entire board wants to take the action, we can certainly try to see that happen. At least give some indication of where it's going. So there's certainty in the budget side of things.
Thank you.
Director Harris.
Yeah, Prabhakar, did the chair make appointments to the subcommittee?
Yes, it did. So the last, Director Harris, you were in there, and then we had Director Hume, who was appointed by, or actually recommended by Director Lee, who wasn't here. Director Frost.
What happens when you don't show up?
That's what you said. I think that might some truth.
Yeah. Well, I didn't know, so Larry didn't tell me. Neither did anybody else. But I'm happy to be on the committee.
And Director Bruins, and the last member would be Director Carr. So there were 4. I asked for 4 or 5, and the 4 were appointed by volunteered, and then Director Carr will be there.
And at this point, is there a set date to meet?
May 24th is one that we have the first meeting.
Okay, very good.
To discuss. Actually, I think we're meeting here in one of these rooms.
Okay, thank you.
Director
1:30. No, I just wanted to verify that meeting. So
It's May
still
24th.
at 1:30 here in the hearing room.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I set for about an hour and a half the first discussion. What we plan to do there is to bring ideas, what we have the money-wise, and what certain ways that we can engage. And then we also want to hear your thoughts, besides what the ideas that we bring. And then we can look at the prioritization in terms of how we fund it and whatnot. Those are the things. That's initial discussion, but not, then it comes back to the main board.
So, to the chair, so I'm not on that committee.
You did not volunteer, Director Cerna.
No, I understand that, but where I'm going with it is, will there be an opportunity, at least through the committee, that I can kind of share, at least as the supervisor representing the lower reach of the Parkway, why we need what we need?
I don't know. I'm going to look to Lisa and others. I'm not versed in the communication.
I think as a member of this board, you can attend, or you could write it.
As chair, could I appoint?
Sure.
Okay.
I don't know if you want to be
Done.
Well, I was just
Well,
thinking
because you said 4 or
something in
5,
writing.
right? So,
Yeah, it would be a 6 by you attending. So because Director Carr filled the 5th spot.
Yeah.
So if you
Still
would want to
based
attend,
on
would
the
be a
numbers.
6th person.
It's
which-
still under the
quorum,
So make it noted that the chair has appointed.
I think
Director
what
Cerna.
happened is I may have missed a meeting, perhaps when this was being established. I was out of country last.
I'm sorry, I did
weeks
not
ago.
make that comment.
So, Chair Cerna, not Chair Cerna, Director Cerna, I share your concerns.
Yeah.
And so if you could not attend that meeting, I would be happy to carry them forward for you.
Well, just as the member of this board that suggested it in the first place, I'd like to continue to participate. But I think it is because I was absent at one
It's
of the
been
meetings.
rectified.
So would, for the directions, for the staff direction, Director Cerna, should we send you the invitation?
Yes,
So,
please.
okay, we'll do that so we'll have 6 members.
Okay.
Okay,
Anything else?
that's it.
All right. Madam Clerk?
All right, acting as Sacramento Area Sewer District, your district consent matter is item number 9, approve the reimbursement agreement with the City of Elk Grove for construction of S-153 Southeast Policy Area Pump Station and Force Main Tank Sewer.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstained? And number 10 is a communications received and filed, so we will now go into closed session. Is there anything to report out of closed session?
no, there's not.
Okay, with that, we're adjourned.